Lesson 21. In previous lessons, we've talked about singular and plural. We found out that if something is singular, there's only one of it, and if something is plural, there's more than one of it. And this quality is called number. If something is singular, we say it's singular in number, and if it's plural, we say it's plural in number. So when you're talking about whether something is singular or plural, you're discussing the concept of number. We've also studied how in Latin, very often the subject and the verb can all be expressed with one Latin word. The word sum, for instance, includes the word I and the word am in English. So when we talk about verbs, it's important for us to understand singular and plural. For instance, if you say I, then that's singular because there's only one I. But if you say we, that implies that there's more than one person involved. So I is singular and we is plural. But in addition to the concept of number, there's another quality that verbs have called person. Verbs can be in the first person, the second person, or the third person. And there's a very simple way to explain person, and that's pretty clearly stated here on the page. Verbs that refer to I or we are called first person, and that's the person doing the speaking. For instance, if you're reading a book or a short story, and the author of the book is telling the story from his own perspective, and he says, I did this and I did that, you would say that he's telling that story from a first person perspective. Next we have second person. And second person is associated with the word you. It's the person or people to whom the speaker is speaking. And then we have third person. And third person refers to words like he, she, or it, or they. It's the person, thing, or people, or things being spoken about. So first person is I or we, the person doing the speaking. Second person means you, the person you're talking to, and third person is he, she, it, or they, and those are the folks you're talking about. So as we think about these verbs and the different forms of the verbs, there are two important qualities to think about: number and person. At the bottom of page 24, there's a chart that helps us to see how person and number interact with one another. As you can see, across the top of the chart, we have singular and plural. And down the left-hand side of the chart, we have first person, second person, and third person. So if we look at where each row intersects with each column, we can see what qualities a given verb has with regard to person and number. Let's go through this chart block by block, starting with I. I is in the first person row, and it's in the singular column. So if you have a verb that says, I am doing something, that verb will be first person singular. If you say, I am, if you say, I went to the store, or I will go to school, any of those verbs would be first person singular. Next we have you. You is in the second person row, and the singular column. So if you're just talking to one person and you say, you are a poet, or you are going to school, then those kinds of verbs would be second person singular. Now if you're talking to more than one person, that's a different story, and we'll get there in a minute. But for now, just keep in mind that when you're talking to one person, that's second person singular. Next we have he, she, and it. He, she, and it are in the third person row and the singular column. So these words are third person singular. If you say he is strong, if you say he is going to school, she is going to school, or it is large, all of those verbs would be third person singular verbs. Moving on now to the top of the right-hand column, we have we. We is in the first person row, but the plural column. So it's first person, just like I, but it's referring to more than one person. If you say we are doing something, then you're not just speaking for yourself, you're speaking for a group of people, perhaps two, perhaps more. So if you say we are going to the grocery store or we are tired, in either of those sentences, the verbs would be first person plural verbs. Next we have you, and this is you plural for when you're talking to more than one person. And as we learned a few lessons ago, in English, we have the same word for when we're addressing one person or more than one person. It's the same word, and the word is you. But in Latin, they have one word for singular you and another word for plural you. So to help us distinguish, we're going to use the word y'all whenever we're talking about second person plural. So that's why I've drawn a little arrow there with the word y'all in it. Technically, the correct English word there would be you, but we're going to fudge a little bit with it and say y'all. So just pretend like you're from the South, and you'll be fine. The word y'all here is in the second person row and the plural column. So if you say y'all are going to the store, y'all are tired, any sentence like that, you have a second person plural verb. Next we have they. They is in the third person row and in the plural column. So if you say they have a big army, they are crossing the river, any sentence like that is going to involve a third person plural verb. Let's turn the page now to page 25, and there we see a chart very similar to the chart we saw in lesson 20 with sum, es, est, sumus, estus, and sunt, except this time we see first person, second person, and third person on the left-hand side, and singular and plural across the top. So sum says I am, and that's a first person singular verb. Es is second person singular because it says you are when you're just talking to one person. Est can mean he is, she is, or it is. So that's third person singular. Sumus is we are. So that's a first person plural perspective there with that verb. Estus means you are, but it's plural for when you're addressing more than one person. So that's a second person plural type verb. And lastly, we have sunt, which means they are, and that's a third person plural verb. Again, it's good to chant these verb forms, as we did in lesson 20. Before we finish up with this lesson, let's briefly go over the exercises. We have 3 goals here. One is to figure out what the subject of each sentence is, and then once we know what the subject of the sentence is, then we want to determine if it's singular or plural. And by doing this, by sort of analyzing these subjects, this will help prepare us for Latin translation by getting us accustomed to thinking about person and number when it comes to verbs. So let's start with number 1. In number 1, the subject of the sentence is I. And I, of course, is first person and it's singular. Number 2, the subject here is you, and we can tell from the context of the sentence that the sentence is only addressing one person. So in this case, you is the subject and it's second person singular. Number 3, the subject here is she, and she is a pronoun in the third person and it's singular because we're only talking about one person. Number 4, we is the subject, and of course, when you say we, you're speaking from a first person perspective, but you're not only speaking for yourself, you're speaking for more than one person. So we would be first person plural. Number 5, the subject here is y'all. Y'all is the kind of word that you would use to address more than one person. So we're going to say that's second person plural. Number 6, they is the subject. They, of course, is third person, and when you use a word like they, you're talking about more than one person, so it's plural and third person. Number 7, he is the subject, and it's obvious that only one person is being talked about here, so he will be third person singular. Number 8, it is the subject, and it's third person singular. Number 9, y'all is the subject, and very similar to number 5, Y'all is second person and plural. Number 10, the subject is flowers, and that is third person, and there's more than one flower, so it's plural. So the word flowers and the verb associated with it will have to be third person plural.